1 week season.
Welcome, everybody, to week 12 of Solo Ship. I'm Squirrel Patrol from 444 Football. I'm joined by JMToWin from 1 week season. JM actually had a pretty solid week 11, single entry wise. Nothing big in multi-entry, but I ended up by the end of the week, I was like focusing my rosters on. I made like 6 single entry rosters that did not have as much differentiation between them as I usually do. I think I ended up with like 2 Jacoby Brissett and 2 Brock Purdy in the same game out of out of 6 rosters. But I ended up, one of the Brock Purdy actually didn't do that well, but just like focusing on overstacking that game with different rosters. I finished like 9th in the power sweep out of 3,700 entries and 5th in the fair catch, which was like a $12 single entry. It's like 7,400 entries. So I had a little bit of a lower volume week for me, but did well with the single entry. How was your week 11?
Yeah, I mean, similar. I was 100% Brissett and 100% Brissett, McBride, Dortch, and then only built 3 rosters and had Michael Wilson on 2 of those 3. And then what was interesting was, so I got 7th in the game changer and 11th in the face mask. So it's like this year that's a 2nd, a 6th, a 9th, and an 11th in the face mask, all on different weekends. I'm still trying to get that win. I don't know when it's coming, but I'll take it. And what was interesting about it was once you put those 4 Brissett plus those 3 onto a roster, like the very obvious next step was to put in CMC because he's in that game and you want to play CMC anyway. And then the next step is like, oh, I have the salary for JSN. And then the next step seemed to be for most people like, well, I could be like a mid-tier defense or I could go all the way down to the Titans. So what was interesting was I had a duplicate roster with somebody else in the game changer, which is just like a 400 entry tournament. And then the roster that finished in 3rd place was another one of my favorite rosters that I'd like built throughout the week. And so, yeah, kind of if you had that starting point, it was like a lot of the same rosters because there weren't that many decisions left by the end of it.
Yeah, I was surprised one of the 2 single entry rosters I had that finished really well had like Puka and he had like the Snowflake, right? But the lower priced guys did so well that like it just mattered raw points, right? So even at his salary, like Puka didn't, but he like put up enough raw points, and the lower priced guys like put out outstanding scores. So if you had the right combination of like the Kittle and the Dortch and the and Wilson and McCaffrey, like it really didn't matter. Like you could get a like poor value score from like Puka or like JSN didn't have like an outstanding game, still put up like 20 plus DraftKings points, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, oh, okay, let me just get points in other spots. I got 15 from Dowdle, and it was like, well, that sucks, but that's good enough, So so now the goal is week 12. Do the same thing again. What's that stack this week? Tell me. Let's just get on. So, hey, I'll tell you what it is. It's Tyrod Taylor and 2 wide receivers. I don't actually think that's the Brissett stack from last week, but I do actually like that one. I think it's interesting. Everybody's like, no, there's no way to save salary. And I'm like, what about the cheap time? You and I were talking about the Bengals tight ends before the show. What about the cheap tight ends? What about Hunter Henry against the Bengals? What about Mike Gesicki or Noah Fant against the Patriots? What about these cheap Jets wide receivers with Tyrod Taylor? So salary doesn't seem that difficult for me. It's kind of the rest of it of like, where's the ceiling on the other pieces, So interesting week this week.
Yeah, actually, now I'm remembering our strategy from last week, right? Was that we had these really high priced guys we wanted to get to that seemed like very, very safe. And then, it was like McCaffrey and JSN and Puka. And I think, JaMarr Chase, who ended up having like a total dud and is suspended for this week, which is one of the storylines we'll have to cover. But yeah, this week the high priced guys don't feel nearly as safe. And it's like Jonathan Taylor is like 10K. He's almost like not under discussion because he needs to do so much at that price tag, to pay off a 10,000, salary. He's facing on the road, in Kansas City. So it's not an outstanding matchup for him. But yeah, we have 11 games on the slate, and we have like some kind of disjointed game environments. We have a handful of potential shootouts, I guess, with like close spread and high total. And then we have some also teams with high implied point totals as a result of being like 2 touchdown favorites, as we start to see at this time of year, as teams completely give up on trying to win, right? Like a Jets team that, is going to get more out of losing than it does out of winning. So they're a 14-point underdog against Baltimore. But I was going to start with the Cincinnati and New England game. I think that's, probably the game that a lot of people are starting with. You've got, but it's a game with question marks, especially as of Friday afternoon. We've got question marks at the Bengals quarterback position. We don't know if it's going to be Joe Burrow or Joe Flacco. Burrow could be returning. He could be returning too early. We have no JaMarr Chase, as we covered in this game. And then for the Patriots, it looks like Rhamondre Stevenson is going to be back. But then what does the workload look like, for TreVeyon Henderson against the Bengals rushing defense that has been atrocious? I guess, what are your thoughts on that game?
Yeah. To me, the week is marked by directional certainty and then uncertainty on individual pieces. But one of the things I was talking about with Pete earlier is that people tend to take role certainty on a player, like take Olave, right? People feel more comfortable with that because they're I know he's getting the targets, but the chances of him having a big game offensively are so low because the chances of the offense doing well are so low. Whereas to me, something like the Patriots or the Lions, where you're we know this offense is scoring points, which means we know that a tournament winner is coming from this offense. And then it's yeah, but you don't know who it's coming from. It's the same thing is the case with somebody like Olave, where you're yeah, I know he's getting the targets, but most of the time his offense isn't going to do well enough for him to actually matter. Yeah, I know that this offense is scoring a bunch of points. I might pick the wrong guy, but at least you know that you're live for picking the right guy, right? So to me, the Patriots and Brown, the Ravens are in a different category because I don't know, the Jets are at least still playing hard. And I don't know that the Ravens offense looks totally right yet. And I kind of wonder if maybe Lamar is dealing with an injury from preseason that he's not letting on to. Things aren't quite clicking there where I think I don't feel as confident that we've got 40 points within range, whereas the Patriots and Lions, they're definitely scoring 30 plus. Their chances of scoring 40 plus are pretty decent. And so then it's just a question of where those points come from. So then one of the things that I love about the Patriots side is it's narrowed down even further in that the Bengals are one of the best wide receiver defenses in the NFL. It kind of goes overlooked because they're so bad, but everything about the Bengals is just tight ends and running backs, right? And so I have played around actually with quite a few practice builds where just from this component of smaller field single entry, piling certainty onto a roster of playing Rhamondre and TreVeyon Henderson together at 11.9K, because you go through backfields and literally, I think it's all but one backfield has scored 35 plus against the Bengals. The problem is only one has scored more than 37 or 38. It's every single week a backfield scores almost exactly 35 points against the Bengals, and that's not quite enough at the salary. But then it's well, one of these guys is getting a bigger share of that pie. I actually kind of think it's Rhamondre. I honestly kind of think I'll be very surprised if Rhamondre doesn't get the start. And then I actually think he's going to get 55% of the touches. And I think a lot of people they're looking at it with their wishful fantasy brains of well, it's got to be TreVeyon Henderson taking the lead now. But it's that's not normally how NFL teams operate, And so especially a coach like Vrabel, it's probably Vrabel has seen Rhamondre every day in practice, right? He knows what he's capable of. There's a reason why he's no, Rhamondre is still an important part of the offense. So I kind of bias toward Rhamondre there. I think Hunter Henry is probably a lot more interesting than people are giving him credit for, because again, how do you attack this Bengals defense? And so, yeah. And then on the Lions side, man, I've been wrong. I've been on the Lions heavily 3 times. It was their 3 highest scoring games, and I picked the wrong players every time. So it's kind of I don't know. But if the touchdowns come through Goff, the answer is probably Goff plus all 3 guys, right? Laporte is out. So it's JMO, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Gibbs. You need 112 points for a 200-point pace, and they've done it twice this year, 112 once, 118 another time. And this would be a spot where they could do it. But then if Goff doesn't get the touchdowns, then it's maybe Montgomery gets them, maybe Gibbs gets them. And so then it's a question of who do you play. But I do think that both offenses are interesting. And then you just have to be how do I play this? You have any read on what do you think is the sharpest way to attack these offenses this week?
So for the Patriots running backs, actually, I have a whole strategy, and I don't know how strictly I'm going to stick to this, but Rhamondre Stevenson is much better priced on FanDuel, where you would expect him to score better, right? Touchdowns and rushing yards. I think TreVeyon Henderson is relatively at least better priced on DraftKings, where you get the full point per reception. So if you are splitting it up, I think you could do a going over the field on Rhamondre on FanDuel and a go over the field on TreVeyon Henderson, or at least own more of them than the other one on that respective site. So Rhamondre better on FanDuel, TreVeyon Henderson better on DraftKings. So that was my way of kind of covering the possibility of like one of them doing well or both of them doing well. I hadn't really thought about the idea of just playing them both on the same roster, but I like against the Bengals rushing defense, I think anything's in play. I'll have to adjust that long time rule I have about like only one running back except for Detroit on the same roster. I might have to add Detroit and New England. I do think speaking of Detroit, right? Like Detroit's one of the teams I have a lot of interest in. We've seen them kind of in these games where they have a large spread before, and it just like doesn't matter. like they don't want to just win by 10.5. It turns out they're fine,
especially coming off a loss.
Yeah. So actually, I think one of my key statistics on the week is JaMarr Gibbs has the best touchdown odds, anytime touchdown odds on at least I'm looking on DraftKings. It's like minus 290. Jonathan Taylor, I think, is at like minus 260 or minus 270. Wow. It's like better touchdown odds for Jahmyr Gibbs, and they still have David Montgomery there. I think for single entry, like let's say you're making 5-6 single entry rosters, I think a thought process of, well, how does Detroit score should be considered on each roster.
Yeah.
That you maybe want to have like a Goff roster that has Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams, and maybe you want to have a Gibbs or maybe Montgomery on the rest of your like 5 or 6 rosters, maybe save one, maybe there's a 20% chance they dud, or 15% chance that the team puts up a dud. So I think you should be thinking about Detroit on each roster. A team you kind of touched on there is actually the Ravens against the Jets. I think I'm a bigger believer in them than you are. It's because Lamar Jackson returned 3 weeks ago, put up 4 touchdowns against Miami, like 4 passing touchdowns. And then had like a relatively bad matchup against Minnesota. I believe it was
in Cleveland,
in Minnesota. Yeah. And then, a tough defensive matchup against Cleveland in bad weather. That's like 3 road games in a row, one of which he put up 4 passing touchdowns. And now they're facing the Jets. We'll see. I think it might be, I would actually consider Lamar Jackson. I think I'll probably have a Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers roster in like single entry out of like 5 or 6. Just because I'm a little bit higher on Lamar Jackson as I usually am. So I think that's a player that I'm high on. I guess I wanted to get your thoughts maybe on the Bengals though, just before we totally leave the Patriots Bengals game. On like the Bengals side, like T. Higgins and Chase Brown, I think they both have some like major flaws. I think between the two, I like Chase Brown a little bit more. Just because of the possibility that he has a crappy game and 8 receptions, and and he's paying off his $6,200 price tag. Any thoughts on the Bengals specifically?
Yeah. First, really quickly on Lamar, like for me, I've got like 6 main quarterbacks. It's May, Mahomes, Lamar, Hurts, Brissett, and Tyrod Taylor. And I think that like I ranked them like, well, I don't know how I ranked them, but like, yeah, Lamar is very much in the mix for me, like in turn, when we get to like stack certainty and ceiling and all that, I have concerns on like slight concerns on ultimate ceiling for Lamar. And stack certainty is somewhat there because usually with Mark Andrews is who he hits with for ceiling. But yeah, I think there's like some question marks there, but he's certainly in the mix for me. I just want to make sure that nobody's thinking I'm like off of Lamar. But yeah, the Bengals are very interesting because like even if Burrow plays, right, you're still dealing with a defense that typically erases wide receivers. Like Drake London was an exception, but if you watch the game, it was like some stack concepts that got him matched up on Marcus Jones, but then also just like a couple phenomenal catches against Christian Gonzalez, right? Christian Gonzalez has allowed the second lowest catch rate among qualified corners behind Quinyon Mitchell. I think it's like 44%. And then when in the past, well, I just think about who T. Higgins is as a player, right? So when JaMarr Chase has missed in the past, T. Higgins hasn't like his role hasn't dramatically changed because it's not like he's the guy who you can use all over the field in the short areas and just get the ball in his hands, right? He doesn't start running the JaMarr Chase routes. And then on top of that, the Bengals aren't super creative in how they use their players. It's usually like, go out there and run your routes. We're better than the opponent. And so I don't see them like doing a bunch of things to scheme T. Higgins open. So I do have concerns about like, I think the ceiling is there. I think his chances of getting to that ceiling are lower than we want them to be. And then same thing with Chase Brown, where it's like, well, you can't run against the Patriots. And so then you're really putting a lot on the passing work. But the question then to me becomes like, well, you're probably throwing 38 times. And so if T. Higgins gets 13 of those targets, what's happening with the other 25? Like, I don't think they're like Yoshivas doesn't command targets. He's still probably getting 3 or 4 targets, like his typical like 10 to 12% targets. Mitchell Tinsley probably gets a couple. Chase Brown maybe gets 7, 8. So I do think there's a lot there for the tight ends. And with Gesicki, it's looking like, I mean, they've activated him off IR. Like, I think he's going to step in and be kind of a leader for targets this week. Honestly, I'd have to go back because, I've been waiting for news here, but there was a stretch last year when T Higgins missed and Gesicki, I think it was last year, maybe it was 2 years ago, but Gesicki was just like their wide receiver too. I mean, that was basically like with the Dolphins, when they franchise tagged him, his agent tried to get him tagged as a wide receiver instead of a tight end because he was used so much in wide receiver, like as a wide receiver in their offense, right? That's basically what he is. And so, yeah, I do think I think Chase Brown is interesting. I think the field is going to just be way overconfident in him and probably somewhat overconfident in T Higgins. I think you and I are on the same page there, but I think both guys have to be considered because it's people tend to overstate like, oh, this wide receiver's out, so there's all these targets. Like, no, when JaMarr Chase is out, there's all these targets, right? And this team is still going to pass because they can't run and you can't run against the Patriots and they're probably going to be trailing. And so it just sets up for the volume to be there and it's going to go to somebody. But I do think that, yeah, it's not as high confidence on these two guys for towards ceiling as people are probably going to think.
So, we covered like the New England Cincinnati game. I think it sounds like we're both pretty high on that game. And then at the risk, I said I like Baltimore, I like Detroit. At the risk of, so just to make it clear, I don't like everything. I wanted to talk about a couple other games that have pretty high totals that I don't think I'm interested in. But, I'm willing to have my mind be changed. But Indianapolis and Kansas City, like Colts at Arrowhead, and then Philadelphia at Dallas, which is not a game I would have thought that I would be down on, a few weeks ago. But both pretty high totals, in the upper 40s. Actually, I think the Kansas City Colts is maybe the second highest of the week at 50 or 50 and a half. Thoughts on those games? Anything you like from them? Am I wrong for maybe trying to be under the field?
Yeah, no. So first off, I missed Goff when I was mentioning quarterbacks. I like Mahomes in this spot just because I think that it has to be on him, right? And we saw all these games like 25 to 30 DraftKings points earlier in the year. He comes in with a game against Denver and a game against Buffalo, a team that matches up really well against them, right? And we've maybe forgotten that he went 25, 26, 31, 30, 27 in his games before that. And so I think Mahomes in a matchup that suits him well is viable. The concern there is, does Lou Anarumo have something here that's going to throw Mahomes off? And I think there's some stack certainly there in the way that Kelsey's been involved in this offense, the way he matches up with the Colts. I'm not on the Colts side because I do think that this is not a great matchup for them from a scoring perspective. And then, yeah, if you look at the Eagles and you look at the season-long matchup against the Cowboys, like what the Cowboys defense has been on the season, and then the cheap price tags, and you're just so drawn toward building it. But every time I build a practice build with Hurts and the wide receivers, I'm like, my thought is do I actually like this spot, or am I just scared that I'm not going to play it and it's going to hit, what it can hit? But no, I'm with you. That's a spot that I don't actually like. I'm scared to not play it. And so I do keep thinking about it. But I think this is a game where, the Eagles score 21, 24, 27. I think they score 3 touchdowns here. I think the Cowboys defense is improving. I think that the problems with the Eagles offense have not been problems of defenses they're playing so much as problems with their offense. And yeah, it feels kind of similar to Tom Brady with the Bucs in his last year, where all season you're but this has got to change eventually. And it's maybe it doesn't, that's kind of where I'm at with this Eagles offense and with this matchup. So yeah, I think I have no strong argument to try to talk people off this spot, but I do keep having the same thought as you of do I really like this spot or do I just think I should like this spot?
Yeah. I'm surprised that I didn't like Philadelphia going indoors to Dallas, but it's a Dallas defense that is upgrading, right? With the actual players that they're getting back from injury.
At all 3 levels. Yeah.
Yeah. Acquired from trade. They're they are a better defense than they were a few weeks ago, just in terms of personnel. And at the same time, Philadelphia, I think, has won the last 2 games, putting up 26 points combined. What if they decide that's how they want to play? We started building a Philadelphia Dallas roster on my Pat Mayo show this morning, and we just stopped. We said none of us like this game. We had one more entry we had to use or whatever. Let's just go to like Pittsburgh and Chicago, right? Like, because like we like that game actually more than the Philadelphia Dallas matchup. I'll say that when you were talking about the Chiefs, I actually do. I think Mahomes would be on the border of a single entry consideration for me if I'm doing 5-6 rosters. That I think you could actually do a Mahomes like Kelsey Rice lineup, and I would probably maybe have Alec Pierce in there. It's maybe, but I just don't love it as much as I love some of the other things on the slate. But I could maybe have it in there so that if that's what takes off, I'm still rooting for something on Sunday. But yeah, I guess let's go.
What are some of the things that you do love on the slate?
Is that you asked we kind of started off the show like who's the Jacoby Brissett of this week, and I think it might be Jacoby Brissett because like Marvin Harrison is still out, and like Michael Wilson, was 3,800 last week. Now he's 4,800. He's not generally a high volume receiver, but like he was last week. So if he has the same kind of numbers at 4,800, it's not going to matter. Like I'll find the extra 1,000. Dortch is maybe priced up a little bit where I'm not as interested in Dortch, but like just the Jacoby, and even if I don't use Michael Wilson, like the Jacoby Brissett, Trey McBride stack is just still so underpriced. Like I've said at tight end, there's like a flow chart. Can you afford Trey McBride? If yes, then you play Trey McBride. If not, well, what quarterback are you using? Because his tight end is probably like 4K or under. So you just use that tight end. I think that even if I'm doing my quarterback is Jared Goff, maybe I want to play Brock Wright in some kind of massive game stack. Like I still want Trey McBride on that roster, right? Like that's still just a double tight end build for me. McBride is so underpriced for his projection, and considering he's at the tight end position. If he was a wide receiver, we'd be talking about massive ownership. I mean, he's going to be massively owned at the tight end position, but all of this is a way of saying that if I'm going to I probably like this game environment the second best after New England, Cincy, the Jacksonville, Arizona. And there's some question. We could potentially get a cheap Jacksonville running back, but I guess your thoughts on that game. Yeah,
I'm not as high on Michael Wilson, I think probably as you are, but I think that the Brissett plus McBride, I mean, if I play it at like my core of my builds, it'll be, I think, the fourth week in a row that it's been at the core of my builds. And I had this discussion with somebody a couple of weeks ago where they pushed back on me when I listed like a quarterback stack, and it was the Lamar plus Mark Andrews. And I laid out the numbers over the previous 17 games. And it was like, you can't pay 10K or whatever they cost and like get this type of production for most. And somebody pushed back and they're like, well, like you can't really include quarterbacks because quarterback scoring is different. And I pointed out to them, if you actually take a quarterback plus one individual pass catcher, right, that costs 10K or 11K, 13K, and compare it to a player who's priced there or like a theoretical player priced there, that quarterback plus one individual pass catcher is almost never going to perform like CMC, right? The quarterback plus the pass catcher costs 10K is almost never going to perform like CMC or Jonathan Taylor because it's so inconsistent who a quarterback is going to hit with, right? And we have like never had McBride plus Brissett have hit for 41 to 56 in 5 consecutive games. 41 was once. It's like 45 to 56 in the other 4 games. And they're still 12K in salary. Like people are thinking about paying 10K for Jonathan Taylor. We pay 10K for CMC and we're like, well, he's going to get 22 to 27 and maybe he gets 35. Well, for 2K more, we're getting basically 45 to 50 5 weeks in a row. So yeah, I'm with you. I think that there's eventually going to be a week where like it doesn't happen. There has to be. And so I feel like I've luck boxed this by being on Brissett 3 weeks in a row and then getting the huge week last week on the week where it's like, oh, and I'll play the cheap guys with him, that it almost like DFS logic pushes me to be like, all right, maybe I'm not going there at my core this week. But that is like initial instinct is still, hey, I've ridden it, 3 weeks in a row or whatever it's been. It's hit 5 weeks in a row. Why not keep going back to it until it stops working? And I'm definitely with you on Reeves had this stat that since week 6, only CMC and Jonathan Taylor are averaging more points per game than McBride. Yeah. We're paying 10K and 9K for those guys. And here's was CMC 10K last week? Whatever we're paying for those guys. And here's McBride at 6,800 at the tight end position, So, and then if he hits, I've been, highlighting this, if he hits, Brissett's probably hitting for 20, which at his price tag makes it worth just adding him to any McBride build. So yeah, man, I'm definitely with you on that one again. and lower than I was, last week, but because it's a different defense. It's not the 49ers, right? Where he could have 57 pass attempts and not get sacked once. And where the 49ers offense could put up points so quickly, right? Like every time I watch a Jags game, like 5 or 6 times I like cover my face because I'm like, what was that decision from Trevor Lawrence, or what was that throw from Trevor Lawrence? So like it's not the same as we had last week, but it's still a great matchup, and it should be a higher scoring game environment. So yeah, man, I'm with you, not all the way, but I'm definitely with you again this week.
I'll throw out my Jacoby Brissett numbers. He's put up at least 20 DraftKings points in each of his 5 starts. The Jaguars defense allows the second fewest rushing yards per game, and the 7th most, I think, passing yards per game. And the Cardinals could potentially be without their top 3 running backs, like James Conner, Trey Benson. Not like Benson might return, but I believe DeMarcado is out as well. So and I think Bam Knight is actually dinged up. But I think Knight's likely to play backed up by like Michael Carter. Yeah, why not just have Jacoby Brissett throw the ball against a defense that allows passing yards? So yeah, I think Jacoby Brissett is one of my top 2 quarterbacks, like outside of Drake May, and he could end up being number 1. But actually, let's touch on some of the other games that maybe have a little bit less interest. We kind of ended up on the Pittsburgh-Chicago game, my morning show. Any interest there in like Caleb Williams or something from the Pittsburgh side?
No.
Okay.
No, and I don't know that it can't hit, but I think there's enough to like in other spots that it's not going to get there for me on tighter builds.
Hey, that was a quick one. Minnesota, Green Bay. I have probably very limited interest. I think maybe as a 150 set, right? Some Caleb Williams is fine, assuming Aaron Rodgers plays. I don't know. It might be Mason Rudolph. Limited interest. Minnesota, Green Bay. I'm basically Emmanuel Wilson or bust, and it looks like Josh Jacobs is potentially going to be active. I think Wilson is one of the running back plays of the week, and probably the running back play of the week if Jacobs is not able to suit up. But we are potentially facing a murky situation going into Sunday with a Josh Jacobs active but expected to be limited kind of situation, which would take me off this game entirely. Is that the way you see it?
Yeah, and I think that Emmanuel Wilson is like the running back play of the week based on like the dearth of available options at the running back position, right? Because I don't like what I was thinking earlier, like early in the week, my practice builds were just like, oh, just auto click Emmanuel Wilson. And then when I started really thinking about it, it was like, well, my projection for Josh Jacobs in this spot would be about 20 points. So do I think Emmanuel Wilson is putting up, he's not putting up the Monungai game, almost certainly. He's not putting up people didn't get it from Jaylen Warren last week, but it was the Kenneth Gainwell game. We're probably not getting that, or the TreVeyon Henderson 30-pointer. We're probably not getting that from Emmanuel Wilson. Never say never, especially because when a guy gets a chance to start, a lot of times that provides this spark. Rico Dowdle was another one. We got 30 points from him on the cheap when he got the starting gig with an injury. And I think that's what people are conditioned to right now. We've had it 3 or 4 times this year, right? 5K running back or sub 5K, putting up 25 to 30 points. And I see this more as a spot where we probably get 14 to 16 and maybe we get 20, 21, 22. And if you don't play them, it's not killing you. But also there's not a lot to love at running back. So then that does make me question, well, am I overthinking it? Maybe you just play Emmanuel Wilson and don't worry about it. And you get 14 to 16 points, great. If he ends up having the 20, 22 pointer, you're covered. If he surprises you with 25, then you're there. And then, if Jacobs is active, I don't know what that would do for me. That's, I guess, it's 2 steps down the road, I guess, in my mind right now. But yeah, any thoughts on that, angle on Emmanuel Wilson? Or are you seeing him as one of these guys who can put up another one of these running backs, who hangs a banner for these cheap running backs?
I think at 5,300, I think he'd probably be my highest owned player. If Jacobs is inactive, I don't think it's necessarily heading that way though. Just because the Packers tend to use one running back, and so the price is right on a week where we're a little bit thin on value. The Packers are playing at home as a 6.5 point favorite. So yeah, I would have a lot of interest in Emmanuel Wilson at 5,300. I actually, just to touch on one more game we didn't touch on, I actually have some interest in Kenneth Walker at the same price tag.
Yep.
Facing the Titans. Seattle likes to run the ball. They're 2 touchdown favorites against a Titans team that gives up a lot of rushing yards. Kenneth Walker seems to be getting a little I've thought of kind of Walker at times as being the number one, with Zach Charbonnet being a strict backup. And then that's kind of gone back and forth a little bit. But right now, Walker seems to be the guy, or at least he was last week. I think 111 total yards. So that's actually a player that I think is being under discussed, or may end up being under owned. Any thoughts on Walker?
Yeah. For me, I've been kind of thinking of him as like, if I were playing MME, or if I needed somebody for like a large field single entry. I hadn't really been thinking about him on my tighter builds, but it's maybe a discomfort thing, similar to the Jalen Hurts, where I'm like, oh, I don't actually even like this game, but I keep considering it, And so, yeah, but I do think like there's been coach speak that his role, he's earned a bigger role. He continues to get the touches. We know he's capable of like ripping off long runs. I used to, back when people would always play Kenneth Walker, I would always cite like, I forget what the numbers were, but he had like 2 games in his career over like 17 DraftKings points or something crazy that like always was surprising when you put it out there. But he is capable of it, So I think if we think Emmanuel Wilson is there for 15 to 20 points and you got to get lucky to get more than that, then I think Kenneth Walker basically falls into the exact same bucket, but at lower ownership. So I definitely like the Walker play, and I think it's very sharp for MME. I don't know if I'm getting there on tighter builds, but you're thinking you might play him in some single entry?
I think I want to be over the field, definitely, like in my 150 set. What I think I would play him in single entry, yes, because I think the matchup is there. I think the role is potentially there. It really comes down to certainty. If Emmanuel Wilson is active and like Josh, or Emmanuel Wilson will be active, but if Josh Jacobs is inactive, I could see myself like playing Walker instead of Wilson, at the same price tag. Because I do think he's going to be under owned, and it is a thin running back situation. So like I would say like Mahomes and like Kenneth Walker are like kind of guys that are like on like I probably will build that like 6th single entry roster and be like, well, yeah, let's do a Mahomes, and maybe I'll switch this guy over here to Kenneth Walker. But I don't think they would be like absurd in single entry, like even 100-person contest, or a 500 person contest. Just to wrap things up, like wouldn't touch on Atlanta or New Orleans at all. 40-point total. Anything from that game that you're interested in?
No. I mean, I think Bijan is obviously viable, right? But like the risk of the offense not doing well. I think in large field play, every week it's been like, we don't get the Falcons, right? I think in large field play, a Cousins stack with Mooney and Pitts and Bijan actually makes a ton of sense, because we're all so certain that Kirk Cousins' arm is gone, and that it's tough to play the Saints defense in New Orleans, and that the Falcons season is over, right? What if we're wrong for like the 6th time this year on what the Falcons are going to do on a Sunday? So I think that's a really interesting angle in large field play, but I'm not touching it on tighter builds. I like Bijan on tighter builds where like I freed up a bunch of salary, and it's kind of like, hey, look, I can do anything I want. I can put Bijan and Gibbs on together, and other people won't have that combo, but I don't actually like him in a vacuum, because it's just hard to see this offense doing well outside of that what if type scenario. And I don't typically lean heavily into what if scenarios on smaller field single entry. And so, not much interest there, unless you've got something different, like a different bug to plant in my ear, maybe something to be thinking about here.
I hadn't really considered the idea of playing Cousins at all.
Yeah. And that was the end of like I told you we got stuck in Denver last night with the kids, and that was like, 1:00 in the morning, laying in a hotel, having to get up in 3.5 hours. And it was like, wait a second, what about Cousins? And I like popped in a whole journal note about it. So it's not something that I've been thinking about, but last night I just had that thought. And it was like, well, that is pretty interesting.
Yeah. Then sometimes the sleep deprivation play is the play you need.
Altitude, sleep deprivation. There you go.
Yeah. All right. But unless there's any final thoughts, that'll do it for this week. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Have a happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Hope to see you at the top of the leaderboards, and we will catch you next week.